Hey guys, it's Zack Wanzer here, and yeah, episode 17 of the Emotions Corner is still being worked on. That, and I'm currently in the middle of working on a show at my local playhouse, so I have no idea if it'll be out by the end of the year or not. I can't make any promises, so please don't ask me when it'll be released. But in the meantime, I'm making this video to share my thoughts on the first trailer for the upcoming Pixar film, Inside Out 2. And it's something, alright. There's good that could come out of the final film, but at the same time, there's some bad that could come out of it. So, in no particular order, I'm going to be bringing up 6 points regarding Inside Out 2 and how it could determine Pixar's future. Okay, let's get the first one out of the way. The recasting of Fear and Disgust. As I'm sure most of you will recall, and just in case you haven't, I'll link to an article in the description below, Bill Hader and Mindy Kaling are no longer voicing Fear and Disgust respectively due to a pay dispute. In the case of the latter, some could be forgiven for thinking that due to the controversy surrounding the Scooby-Doo spin-off Velma on HBO Max, Disney and or Pixar don't want to be associated with Mindy Kaling. That's not the case here, folks. Plus, this isn't the first time Kaling's been replaced in a Disney film. Instead, Best Emotion Girl will now be voiced by Liza Lapira, whom I knew literally nothing about before this trailer dropped. But as for Fear, his new voice will be Tony Hale, and just from that, I can't help but think of Forky from Toy Story 4.
I am not a toy. I'm a spork. Be quiet. I was made for soup, salad, maybe chili, and then the trash. I'm litter. Freedom!
We don't get a whole lot from either of them, but we do hear a bit more from Most Relatable Emotion, and I don't think I could hear much difference between Kaling and the other voice. See, or rather, hear for yourself.
On a scale of 1 to 10, I give this day an F. What do you mean, we?
Hear the difference? I can't. But hopefully we'll hear more of it when the film drops next summer. Next of all, we know that new emotions are going to be joining the original Quintet. Press releases have so far confirmed that 4 new emotions will be joining joy, sadness, anger, fear, and disgust to control the console in Riley's mind, those being anxiety, envy, ennui, and embarrassment. The only one we've seen them thus far is anxiety, the orange puppet-like emotion to be voiced by Maya Hawke, daughter of Mason Evans Sr. and Beatrix Kiddo. But right out of the gate, this raises many questions. Why on earth do there need to be more than 5 emotions in Riley's head? If you look back at their appearance in the first film, they have 5 emotions each, and they're already past puberty. The same thing applies to the characters seen in the ending credits like Riley's teacher, the pizza girl, the bus driver, and even a dog and a cat. I don't know why they're going this direction. One of the script ideas for Inside Out was that there'd be up to 27 emotions before it was whittled down to just 5. There'd better be a pretty good explanation as to why Riley, at age 13, has more than 5 emotions whilst her parents don't. Not only that, and this might sound like nitpicking right out of the gate, but please bear with me on this, the existence of the aforementioned new emotions doesn't seem to make sense. Fear has been shown to already express anxiety during Riley's first day of school, as well as when anger suggests running away back to Minnesota, which makes anxiety's presence feel redundant. Envy and embarrassment feel like extensions of disgust, the former because green is a color associated with envy, and latter because disgust herself has expressed embarrassment, so, again, redundant. And as for ennui, for the record, that's something which means boredom, which I totally didn't look up to see if it was real or not. We don't know much about them, but they could be somewhere between sadness and anger. If you know anything about color theory, blue and red represent extremes, yet there's already a purple emotion, fear. As an aside, I thought for a short while that they were going to replace Fear and Disgust outright in favor of the new characters due to Hader and Kaling's departure, but fortunately that turned out not to be the case. Still, why 4 new characters when you've already got 5 old ones who could be pretty versatile in many situations? For example, sadness and disgust could both work together whenever Riley gets embarrassed. Just a thought there. This next point isn't as significant, but I'm going to mention it anyway. There is a series based around the world of Inside Out, being produced alongside the second movie, to be released on Disney+. No idea how it's going to fare as little information has been given out so far, but if I had to venture a guess, it most likely takes place after Inside Out 2 due to the new characters. We should probably expect to see it in the next year or 2 at least. Speaking of which, the last few years for Pixar have been pretty rough to say the least. Ever since the release of Toy Story 4 in 2019, Pixar's not been doing so hot in terms of box office numbers. Much of it has to do with COVID shutting down movie theaters just as Onward was coming out, but the next 3 films that followed were all dumped onto Disney+, even though Turning Red was intended to come out in theaters. And while Lightyear did end up being released in theaters, it barely made back its budget of $200 million, but it did make Pixar a profit. And most recently, Elemental was initially believed to be another flop from Pixar, but it gained legs during a summer in which family-friendly films were scarce and becoming a sleeper hit. While that could be considered a victory for Pixar, it's a minor one at best. Part of me suspects that it's due to Disney's mishandling of Pixar films in their respective marketing campaigns. Lightyear didn't really convince many people to see a spin-off focused on Buzz Lightyear, and Elemental only really gained traction due to positive word of mouth for moviegoers, as well as their willingness to wait for the film to come out on Disney+. Inside Out 2 is sure to bring in box office numbers, but the question is, will it be sustainable enough to keep Pixar from going under? And on that note, Pixar's reputation of sequels have been very mixed to say the least. After what many would call Pixar's peak period from 1995 to 2009, starting with 2010's Toy Story 3, they began to expand upon their early films up to 2006's Cars and make sequels, for better or for worse, with the occasional original film thrown in the mix. So for every Inside Out and Coco, there's a sequel to Cars or The Incredibles. With Toy Story being the sole exception to this rule, many of Pixar's sequels, or prequel in the case of Monsters University, are hit or miss. The best case scenario is that they're almost as good as the original film, but there's a few little things that prevent them from crossing the finish line. The worst case scenario, depending on who you ask, is that they end up tarnishing what comes before, which makes them somewhat awkward upon rewatching them. And with Toy Story 5 being in the works, who knows what that will end up doing to the 4 films that came before it. Which brings me on to the last point, is that at the moment, Pixar's future is uncertain. Remember when Toy Story 4 was announced and how a lot of people were divided on its mere existence, especially after the ending to Toy Story 3? Well, while that film did receive a 97% score on Rotten Tomatoes, not everybody felt that way, with some going so far as to call it Pixar's worst film. I don't agree with that, and I think it's overreacted to say that it destroys everything the first 3 films set up. But anyway, John Lasseter, prior to his departure, had wanted Toy Story 4 to be their last sequel film for a while so that Pixar could focus more on original films. Lightyear was a spin-off, so technically that doesn't count as a sequel. But as I just stated, COVID screwed things up and got to the point that Angus MacLane and Galen Sussman were among those let go from Pixar earlier this year. Couple that with Pete Docter, the director of the original Inside Out, taking over as chief creative office for Pixar, and Elio being held back to June 2025 due to the just-ended writer's strike, Inside Out 2 is Pixar's big make-or-break film, which leads us to the big question. Will Inside Out 2 fail? Well, that depends on how you define fail. In terms of box office, most likely not, because it's gonna make money for Pixar. I mean, just look at The Incredibles 2, which managed to make even more money than the first one did. But in terms of critical response, again, most likely not, taking The Incredibles 2 into account, in which its Rotten Tomatoes score is just short of the original, and the same will most likely happen with Inside Out 2. How the audience like myself will react to the film remains to be seen until June next year. And yes, I will be seeing it when it comes out, but for now, my expectations are not very high. But they're not very low either. Somewhere in the middle, really. But if Inside Out 2 manages to pull itself off and blow my mind, I will be more than happy to admit that part of me had been wrong. I mean, I was unsure about Toy Story 4 prior to its release, only to be left feeling emotional at its ending, so history could repeat itself 5 years later. Who knows? I'm Zack Wanzer, and I promise I'll get episode 17 finished as soon as possible. But to close out this video, let's see what the rest of the Emotions Corner crew have to say.
While I myself never actually saw the first Inside Out all the way through, I can understand why so many people loved it. And as for the upcoming sequel, well, I intend to stay on the positive side and hope Pixar actually pulls off a good winner with this one. Plus, with more emotions coming in, the closer is going to turn Riley's head into his own little sitcom show. If only they had more of a psycho emotion to go with it.
I'm definitely hyped for this movie, but I am a little bit cautious at the same time. I have seen some of my friends have theories on how the old emotions would slowly warm up to these new faces, in addition to many other possibilities, and I'm all up for those. On the other hand, I can see where the others are coming from. In addition to the new faces being a bit redundant since they were all captured with just 5 emotions in the first film, the 4 new emotions kind of feel a bit overkill. I'm aware that sequels can introduce more than this amount, which is totally fine, but in this case, I can't help feeling this could end up being similar to how Blue Sky was handling Ice Age. What I mean is that they just kept adding more characters with every film they made and didn't remove the unnecessary ones. I still have hope that this movie will turn out good, but my expectations are going to be kept low until more comes out.
I have mixed feelings about this. I can understand the appeal of new characters, but these new ones seem a bit too left field, even for me. The remember the new guy trope is almost in full effect here, as we are seeing characters that weren't introduced in the first movie, even when humans who are fully grown. At least in the Lion King 2/Lion Guard's case, you can make the argument that Kion was playing somewhere else on the day that Kiara met Kovu, while during her first hunt onwards, there's an explanation for Kion's absence. He and his friend Ono are off to the Tree of Life with the rest of the guard to seek treatment. I can't think of a plausible explanation for these emotions to be absent in the minds of all these adults. So, who knows what's going down?
So far, I'm looking forward to seeing Inside Out 2. New emotions being introduced means more people could potentially join the emotions corner somewhere down the road, which also means new and more wacky hijinks between us could ensue to amuse our viewers. Until then, I just need to see the trailers first to further fuel my excitement. Because Inside Out rules!
At first, I wasn't sure what to make of the announcement of Inside Out 2 because it seemed completely out of the blue, but after seeing the trailer, I guess I'm a bit neutral to it. Don't get me wrong, there have been some sequels that I grew quite fond of, like Toy Story 2 and The Incredibles 2, but when it comes to making more sequels, it can sometimes prove to be unnecessary unless they're done right. Like, let's take Toy Story 3 for example. I still like to think that the third film would be the true finale of the series because of how Andy parted with his toys with a heartfelt farewell, and the very same with Woody in Return, because it was meant to be a wholesome conclusion to the film trilogy altogether, and yet they insist on making the fourth one right off the bat. That was when I figured that the film series had completely bombed. But the point that I am trying to make is that sometimes it can be unnecessary to make more sequels after 2 or 3 films, depending if they would live up to everyone's expectations. But while I'm on the subject of Inside Out 2, I am quite intrigued enough to want to see it, but I am still hoping that it will live up to everyone's expectations upon its release.